The First Mermaid, a short story by aartadventure. In ancient Greece, there once lived a girl. Her name was Parthenos. Parthenos spent much of her youth in her father's vineyard. Although her chores were endless, she always had the company of her two sisters, Roeo and Malpadia. Together, they would turn the work into fun, playing hide and seek between the leafy rows as they tended to the grapevines, and of course, picking off the juiciest of grapes to snack on as each harvest approached. It was almost the perfect childhood, being closely connected to nature and the rhythm of life. But things in the mortal realm are rarely perfect, and this was also true for Parthenos and her sisters. Their father, Staphylos, was a man whose heart pumped tainted blood. His mood would flicker from charming to wrathful over the strangest of little things. The girls soon learnt to always keep their guard up around him. As they grew, Roeo and Malpadia would avoid their father as much as possible by spending more and more time down in the village. Roeo would flirt with the boys, and Malpadia would flirt with the other girls. But Parthenos continued to stay close to the vineyard. After all, the chores just didn't disappear as the three girls grew, and now she was often doing the work of all three combined. Still, it was the way that Parthenos chose to escape their home and their strange father. And truthfully, she always enjoyed her time out in nature. In fact, she would often return home long after the moon and stars began to shine each night in the sky above. Although Parthenos was not aware, her long days of toiling in the vineyard did not pass unnoticed. Each night, far above, and for many years now, the moon goddess Selene would wake and look down upon the earth, almost always finding Parthenos under her gaze, toiling away as she completed her evening chores. The years passed, and, as is the way of things, children become adults. All of Staphylos' daughters became renowned beauties, much to the dismay of Staphylos, who angered at the thought of not only possibly losing his daughters, but also the free labor they provided for his vineyard. Of all three young women, it was the shy and quiet Parthenos who grew most in beauty, blessed by the influence of the moon goddess. Parthenos became the fairest maiden of all the lands. Her skin was a sun-kissed copper from her days toiling under the sun, and her hair a silvery blonde, a gift from Selene herself. Parthenos was also beautiful inside. Her quiet words and kindness would radiate towards anyone she met. Parthenos would allow passers-by to feed on the vineyard grapes, when her father was not looking, of course, and she would always find a corner in the barn for the homeless to sleep before they continued on their wandering ways the next morning. One night, a moon unlike any other cast its light across the lands. Selene was at the peak of her moon powers. An otherworldly light of silverish greenish gold cast down from the moon goddess to all below. Parthenos was awestruck. By the time she came to her senses, it was very late, and she returned home with haste, fearing that Staphylos would anger at his dinner not having been prepared already. But Parthenos returned to something far worse. The house was in disarray, and she found Malpadia whimpering on the floor. Rushing to her sister's aid, she asked after her and Roeo. Through sobbing fits, Mulpadia shared the horrors of the day with Parthenos. Mulpadia explained how Staphylos had seen the signs that Roeo had become pregnant but unwed. In a rage, he had confronted her. However, Roeo had been sworn to secrecy not to share her remarkable truth. In fact, it was Apollo, the god of the sun and light, that had been taken with Roeo, much like Selene had with Parthenos. Eventually, he could not bear to be apart from Roeo, and each night, after Selene woke, Apollo would descend to Earth to be with Roeo. Soon, she had fallen pregnant with their child. Apollo planned for her and the child to ascend to the heavens as soon as the child was safely born. The other gods would not permit a mortal among them, not unless she was suckling a babe of the gods. Yet Staphylos knew nothing of this. He saw only an ungrateful and disgusting wretch before him. How could such a creature without any morals be his daughter? In a fit of anger, he swept Roeo up and locked her into a large chest. He then quickly began to drag the heavy box away on his horse and cart. Without time to think, Mulpadia chased after her trapped sister as fast as she could run. But by the time she caught up, it was too late. In horror, Mulpadia watched her father heave the locked chest into the river. The current dragged the box away in seconds, sinking quickly as Mulpadia listened to the muffled screams of her dear sister. Mulpadia returned home in a hopeless daze as the sun began to set early. Apollo was distraught at the events he had witnessed, but he was bound by the other gods not to interfere. All he could do was give up the light he chose to cast upon Earth each day. In response, the gods transferred the power of Apollo to Selene, causing the moon to flare and cast light unlike any other night that had come before it. Selene also watched the events in dismay, but like Apollo, she was also forbidden from using her powers on the lands of mortals. Back in the mortal realm, as Parthenos learned the fate of her dear sister Roeo, they were suddenly confronted by their father returning home. In fear, they stepped backwards, knocking over his prized bottle of wine. His rage turned towards his two remaining daughters, lunging forward towards them with the eyes of a wild beast. In terror, Parthenos and Mulpadia ran. Although they were young, their father was fast and quickly gave chase. As they reached the river, Mulpadia knew she couldn't continue, and rather than suffer at the hands of her father, she leapt in, eternally joining her sister Roeo as the fierce waters swiftly dragged her away to her demise. Parthenos surged with adrenaline, running faster than ever before, and all the time Staphylos was close at her heels. Watching above, Selene continued to cast the otherworldly green-gold light down for Parthenos to see where her feet were falling. But even with Selene's help, Parthenos almost tripped and fell many times. Studying her feet carefully, she screamed in terror as she suddenly reached the sheer cliff dropping down to the ocean far below her. She knew her father was close behind. What could she do? Where could she go? Her body aching and her heart about to burst, Parthenos knew it was either her father or the ocean. In a final move of defiance against her father, she leapt off the sheer cliff. Her screams echoed all the way to the heavens and to Selene above. Overcome, Selene flared with her new powers, conjuring a messenger lunar moth. Gifting the lunar moth with magical moon dust jewels of golden glimmer, she sped the moth away at light speed, using the powers she had gained from Apollo. And so within seconds, the moth arrived in the mortal realm, just as Parthenos plunged into the dark ocean waters far below the cliff top. And the moment Parthenos hit the water, Selene's inability to act was broken. The oceans were not the realm of mortal man. Not now, not ever. It was Selene who held sway over the tide and the movements of the ocean. Using her lunar moth messenger, Selene caused the waters to surge, lifting Parthenos up into the air moments before she was doomed to drown. Reaching out instinctively in a heaving wave of glimmering spray and magical light, Parthenos found her fingers touching the regal lunar moth. Instantly, a gold harness grew across her chest, forever linking Parthenos with Selene. And as she gasped for air, her body began to transform. Ribs broke open to expose gills, and her legs began to fuse, forming the tail of a fish. Reborn anew, Parthenos flung her now glimmering greenish gold hair into the sea spray as she became Luna, the first of mermaids. From that day forward, any man with a darkness in his heart would not return safely from the oceans. For Luna is always there now, watching, waiting, ready to consume the soul of any man who would harm another without cause, hoping always to make up for the lives of her lost sisters. And what of these doomed sailors' shipmates who would watch these vengeful visions? On silvery full moons, they would sometimes see the flick of a green gold tail throwing ocean spray into the air, forming a galaxy of shimmering, watery stars as they watched their friend disappear below, never to be seen again.